everybody. My name is Ryan Need. I am one of the U.S. chapter co-chairs for the SPP. We have just kicked things off, and I'm partnering up with Anthony, who'll introduce himself in just a moment. But my background is I've been in procurement for 24 years. My day job, I work for BP, although I'm not speaking in official capacity today, but hopefully in the future, where BP has just embarked on a net zero ambition. And I feel like I'm very much excited about the opportunity for the SPP just because I'm learning so much about what it means to be in sustainable procurement. And so I'm very excited to work alongside Anthony and with Sarah's help here so far to build out the US chapter, and very much looking forward to meeting and working with you to make an impact in your organizations. So that's a bit about me, and I'll turn it over to Anthony.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Fuller, and as Ryan said, I'm the co-chair of the US chapter. It's great to see everybody online today. Hopefully we'll have a great session, great discussion. And I'm very pleased we got Sarah with us as well, who obviously heads up the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. I myself am kind of like Ryan, a long-time procurement professional. I actually work in the pharma industry, currently work for Mitsubishi Tanabe, which is one of Japan's largest pharma companies, but based here in New Jersey. I've been with them for about 9 years now, responsible for all aspects of their procurement, sourcing, outsourcing, and pretty much everything to do with the outside world. So that's about me. Maybe Sarah, you can introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks so much. My name is Sarah O'Brien. I'm the CEO of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, and actually have been doing this work for, I hate to say it, but about 20 years. So really excited to see the growth in interest and connection among among procurement professionals around sustainability. And very happy to be here today to talk with you about maybe getting some more resources to support the growth of your programs. Thanks so much to US chapter for inviting me to be part of this great call.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, Anthony. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And Ryan, would you like to take over now? You're muted, Ryan.
My apologies. I think we were going to see if we could get a little our audience participation here with a quick poll. Do we have that available, Khaled?
Yes, so I'll just launch the first one.
Yeah, so I think just as a setup to that, we have Sarah here who's going to talk about the topic of how to gain sponsorship and investment into your sustainable procurement program in each of your organizations. And we thought in order to set up that conversation, we'd engage with the audience here just to get a sense check on where people are. And if you can go ahead and, yeah, there it is on the screen there. So really want to get a feel for how you would rate the maturity of your sustainable procurement program in your organization. And essentially, basically 0 to 5 type scale, where 5 is most mature. And if you think about, does your top exec in your organization embed sustainable procurement outcomes into its strategy such that then you can build a program around it? That's something to think about as you answer this question. And if you actually have no clear sustainable business strategy whatsoever, top down, then obviously you're going to be more on the 0 to 1 side of the coin there. So just curious about your quick response to that, and we can get a sense check of what that looks like.
We're already getting some responses, so let's give it a few more seconds.
Sure. And will we show the results of that, Khaled, before we go to number 2, or should we do them both at the same time?
Oh, they're actually at the same time. That's set up.
Okay. So then yeah. The second piece was, what is the biggest obstacle you face with embedding sustainability into your organization, into your purchasing decisions across your organization? So there's a handful of options here around, sustainability not ingrained into the culture as an important theme or an important business imperative. Maybe you don't have sufficient exec sponsorship for decisions, or it doesn't link to a business strategy clearly. Maybe there's no targets, that there's an intent, but there's just not quantifiable or specific business outcomes that have targets associated with them that you actually can drive toward. The other one was limited procurement skills and experience. And that's largely a huge part of what this SPP is all about, is helping equip and empower procurement functional experts to drive those conversations, but maybe that's a skills gap in your organization, or if there's something else, add it to the chat.
We got about 60% responses so far. Coming up 63. Come on, people, you can do it. All right, should we finish it for now, Ryan?
Okay, sure. Sounds like that's a good point to show results.
Yes, there we go.
Okay, so 47% was the largest grouping, so that's middle of the road there. Feeling like you've got some of the foundation in place, but perhaps not all the way mature. And 3% of you answered that you have a really mature program, and then 3% of you answered that you really don't have any program. So quite an equal distribution there, which is very interesting. And part of the real opportunity with SPP is to join up some of the more mature leaders in this space to impart knowledge, to make an impact to those that maybe need that help. And here we go. We have probably a lot of opportunities to talk about what that might look like in practice with these responses. So thank you for that set of responses. And then the second one, let's see, what was later? Number one answer was limited procurement skills or experience to bring sustainable procurement decisions into the organization. So that's interesting. The number 2 and 3 tied responses were importance of sustainability not ingrained in the culture. And then the third was no clear or measurable sustainable targets or data needed to drive towards outcomes. So interestingly, insufficient exec sponsorship was the least answered question. So it's great that we have such fantastic executive sponsorship. And there was a handful of others, and maybe there's things in the chat I can't see at the moment, but that's great. That's really helpful. Gives us a real good baseline to set the context for the conversation. And I think with that, Khaled, we'll get into the content.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. So, Sarah, would you like to share? You're muted. Sorry.
There we go.
There we go.
Yep. Sorry. Every once in a while, that Zoom box just gets in front of things. There we go. So again, I'm Sarah O'Brien with the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe even good evening if folks are joining from the East. The Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council is a global community. We lead a global community of purchasers, suppliers, advocates, and experts dedicated to building a sustainable world through the power of procurement. We have 160 plus organizational members. We're growing all the time. Everyone from the US General Services Administration and Microsoft down to small towns, small community colleges, all together focusing our approximately $500 billion in annual spend on the same strategy. And that is leveraging procurement as a powerful engine of change. We came together in 2013 around this principle, and over the past decade have grown, learned, and built an infrastructure, an organization that provides many, many benefits to folks like yourselves, whether just starting out or somewhere along the maturity curve. We offer coaching, peer learning, and really that sense of aligning for impact. So I wanted to talk about why sustainable procurement. Why have I been in this field 20 years? Why have our members developed these leadership practices, and how we can move forward? So you've probably seen something quite like this, but for the average organization, unless like Ryan, perhaps you work in oil and gas or something that has a big impact in their scope 1 and 2 operations, most organizations find 70 to 80% of their sustainability impact occurs in their supply base or supply chain. Excuse me. And that's impact for good or ill. So if you're trying to be a more sustainable organization, if you're trying to differentiate around sustainability, this underwater portion is really where that work takes place, around the whole gamut of social, environmental, economic sustainability. The other piece I wanted to note, and it's interesting how it ties into the poll, is that procurement folks often come to sustainable procurement thinking, well, this means now for every product we buy, I have to buy a greener product. And so they're thinking down at this tactical procurement level when they first come to this practice. But what we want to make really clear, and I want to make really clear to the audience on this call, is you already know how to do procurement programs. Many of you are involved, no doubt, in supplier diversity or category management or strategic sourcing, all of which take place at this high level, up in the strategic planning realm. And that strategic planning, oh, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. There we go, apologies. That strategic planning pays for itself, justifies itself when you get down into the tactical procurement process, because it enables you to have a vision of where you're going, a sense of goals and metrics that dock up under your strategic goals, and to build a program that rolls all the way up to your organization's larger commitments on the sustainability front. So you do know how to do programmatic sustainable purchasing. It's just taking that skill set and looking at a different set of attributes and content. And finally, I want to talk about prioritization. You know, when we first started, we even had t-shirts that said prioritize. Again, because you can try to boil the ocean. You can try and make every single product or service you buy more sustainable, but that's really unlikely to add up to impact. When we first began, we did a prioritization pilot with a large university, because universities buy pretty much everything that public or private purchasers might buy. And we found that the top 5 purchasing categories contained or leveraged 64% of total spending and actually had 83% of estimated impact. So rather than involving every procurement staffer all the way down through every category, it was really important to understand that if that entity, if your organization does a similar spend analysis and concentrates on these high spending, high impact categories, that sharpens focus and reduces complexity for you. So we always encourage that as the first step. Speaking of first steps, you know, again, very aligned with the poll, people are at all different levels along their sustainable procurement journey. Some of you may be just starting out, you know, that volunteer army, you care about this passionately, you want to drive it into the work that you do and have a positive impact. Others are, you know, anywhere along this chain. What I can tell you for sure is no matter where you are, even if you're at this top level where your metrics are aligned, your performance reviews rely on sustainability integration, you still need more resources, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. This is research that the SPLC did a few years ago. We thought, you know, everybody needs investment. How do we help our members and the larger sustainable purchasing community understand the best arguments to use as they speak to their leadership about building their program? We didn't want to speak just from our perspective as an organization that supports purchasers. We wanted to really get the word on the street, the lowdown from our purchasing expert members. So I won't read all of these folks, but it includes, you know, Accenture, Sodexo, Clarion, Citi, and more. And they gave us some really clear answers about how they had won more resources and more support from their C-suite. So we'll run through those. And then I think Anthony's going to tell us a little bit about his journey within his organization, kind of pushing these arguments forward and receiving more attention and positive resourcing. So first of all, If you are a company that makes and buys and sells anything, including services, talk about customer revenue. It's critically important to understand that customers are looking for sustainable suppliers and sustainable solutions to reduce their own negative impacts. So being able to tell that story of your sustainable procurement and how it addresses that 70 to 80% of your sustainability impact is critical for attracting and retaining customers. A really important tip here that I like to remind folks of is people often go laboriously to the contracts, maybe 1,000 contracts, and try and find those ones that have specific sustainability asks. What we heard from a number of our members was, don't do that. If a customer has one contract where they have a sustainability ask, or you've had one conference with them where they've asked about it, assume that all revenue from that customer is at risk if you are not moving towards satisfying their sustainability demands. Much more convincing argument and much less labor involved in screening through all of those contracts. Second, and this is very similar, talk about your investors. If you're working for a publicly traded firm, as we all know, ESG issues have come to the fore and will continue coming to the fore over the near future. And we can talk about there are flaws, there are growing pains with ESG, but clearly your C-suite, your chief financial officer in particular, is looking at this very, very critically. So again, remind your leadership that 70 to 80% of your sustainability impact is in your supply base or supply chain, and that's going to show investors, if you are integrating sustainability into your go-to-market strategy, that is going to convince investors that you really are taking this seriously and understand what you're doing. Talk about the competition. Again, we're talking about customers and investors. Your peers in your sector are also thinking about how to make themselves more attractive, more palatable, more investable by pursuing sustainability objectives. So making sure that your leadership, again, understands that your sustainable procurement efforts are addressing the majority of your sustainability impact and can be a key differentiator. It's very important information for them, which they may not really know yet. They may have given you a big, hey, make it sustainable, but it's not always clear how critical procurement is to the sustainability journey of any company. Talk about return on supplier engagements. This is a very interesting one because if you are engaging with suppliers because you need them to make changes so that your procurement can have reduced environmental or social negative impact, you need to engage with those suppliers. You need to sometimes support them with capability building. You may need to increase efficiencies, think about transport. There are all kinds of places where you will be engaged in discussion and your supplier will be engaged in learning sometimes toward meeting your goals. And that means that you've got a really solid relationship or growing relationship. And I put this slide in because it was very interesting. During COVID, we repeatedly heard from our members, yeah, I'm not having that much problem with breaks in my supply chain because I already have this really good dialogue with my suppliers. And then the Sustainable Procurement Barometer, which is a report that comes out every couple of years, funded by EcoVadis, and this year carried out by Stanford Business School's supply chain program, showed that, in fact, that anecdotal evidence that we were seeing seemed to be true in a very large sample. I think it was about 3,000 some buyers and suppliers. 63% of buyers and 73% of suppliers said that sustainable procurement practices helped them get through the pandemic. So very, very interesting evidence. Obviously, talking about risk and reputation. If something bad happens in your supply chain, there's serious reputational risk to your company. And again, if you're more engaged with suppliers, if you set a higher bar for suppliers, you can begin uncovering and addressing unrecognized or unresolved supply chain issues before they tarnish your brand. And this is one that's very interesting. Risk management in a lot of firms is beginning to take on more sustainability knowledge and sustainability effort, but it's not always fully incorporated. So thinking about how procurement can begin to address that through supplier connections and goals is a really important piece to bring up. Talk about corporate strategy. Anyone in any business knows that consumers and B2B purchasers are looking for organizations that show responsible, ethical behavior and show that they are capable of improving their environmental performance and the environmental performance of their suppliers over time. This can't be undersold to your leadership, that this is part of that big corporate strategy for long-range improvement. Talk about cost savings. People often think of in sustainable procurement as they begin as, oh, you know, maybe I'll have to buy a more expensive product. It's maybe more niche product and it'll cost me more. But in fact, if you think of sustainable procurement, again, as a strategic planning and program development effort, there are many places where you can offset the potential added cost in some areas with efficiencies, waste reduction, less purchasing of given product, replacing it through a different strategy. And so really focus on that cost savings benefit, which is critical to the acceptance of your program. And finally, all of this sounds very big, but talk about small steps. The reasons that when we're coaching our members, we focus them on building a big vision, you know, 3 to 5 year vision with an even longer term audacious goal, but starting with a 1 to 2 year set of specific initiatives is that you need those incremental wins for yourself and for your team to build momentum for next steps, building momentum not only internally for your team to feel confident that this is something you can take on, but also, again, looking upward to get those more resources. If you solve a problem for your organization, save money for your organization, or otherwise show a real success, for example, getting an SPLC award, you can definitely build momentum for the next step. So I strongly encourage you to go download. This is a free white paper on our website. Please do download it to see the details that people give, because people tell wonderful stories to support these points. And I want to make sure that we share those with you as well. So thank you very much. That's my piece. And I'm going to stop sharing and hand off to Anthony to talk about his real world experience beginning to build a program.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for that excellent overview. This feels a little bit like the sustainable procurement version of responding to the State of the Union, since I think you've gone into so much rich information there. Obviously, we can see that the topic has many facets or ways in which it can be approached. And what I want to do now is just take a few of the themes that you raised and talk about how they show up in my context. And by choosing just a few, I'm obviously not downplaying, you know, the importance of the others, but rather just trying to show that you don't need to do everything or embark on every part of the journey at the same time. So I think even the biggest companies would say we can't always do everything. So just to go in the order in which the topics appeared, we said to talk about the competition. So this means showing that sustainable procurement can be a differentiator. So we found that explicitly referring to sustainability when we speak with suppliers or service providers has been a true differentiator for us. And in some areas, such as product development or R&D, the very idea of measuring carbon footprint or redesigning pilots to reduce waste, deliberately looking for ways to use technology or virtual processes instead of travel, for example, is actually surprisingly novel. So in quite a literal sense, we've begun to differentiate ourselves as a customer by making this part of our supplier selection process and supplier engagement process. And obviously, differentiation is not a neutral term. I mean, for example, a supplier who could not meet our expectations would quote unquote differentiate themselves out of consideration, and the same might even be true for us. In other words, there could be a mismatch or an asymmetry of expectations on both the demand and the supply side. But interestingly, with some of our largest suppliers, who are often public companies or who publish a CSR or ESG report, we've been able to show that our sustainable procurement initiative also helps them achieve their corporate goals. I hate to use the tired expression of win-win, but leveraging sustainable procurement has helped us to gain supplier commitment and actually deepen some of our supplier partnerships. So on that note, the next one I talk about is a return on supplier engagements. Now, actually, I think this one may take a little bit of unpacking, meaning that I think the benefits of a sustainable approach.
Sorry, just one thing. If you're sharing something, you're not actually sharing. Okay, just making sure.
I'm just, just me. So the benefits of sustainable approach, for example, efficiency, innovation, reliability, and so on, often need to be found, and then they have to be shown or sold to stakeholders. So as Sarah mentioned, people who are maybe not familiar with the concept of sustainability might think that it means adding expense, deliberately paying a premium for a quote unquote green product or service, for example. And whilst, there may be some truth in that, although I'd argue that it's a kind of a false comparison, because a truly sustainable product or service takes full account of its own environmental impact and costs, whereas an unsustainable one simply pushes those costs onto someone else. I think there is a way to show how a sustainable program delivers business benefits. So for example, in our industry, in pharma, there's a phase of product development that conventionally entails a lot of in-person visits to key sites for data verification and collection. Now, the use of technology to make those tasks virtual, although obviously that brings its own sustainability challenges, can lead to an absolute reduction in travel and therefore cost. It can create faster access to the data that we need and thus can enable quicker decision making, and also better quality and therefore less rework, to name a few. Now, those are benefits from both a business and a sustainability perspective. So I kind of like the idea of finding that intersection of interests where different stakeholders can all get something that's important to them, albeit for different reasons. And I think that's a key element that helps to sell a sustainable procurement program. You're not necessarily sacrificing something. And I guess I'd say that philosophically, the way to look at it is that what we need is for colleagues in the business to help us achieve critical outcomes. We don't necessarily need to convert them into true believers. Getting alignment on action is the goal. Sarah also mentioned talking about corporate strategy, and this one actually very real to me, because just last year I presented at a town hall meeting to explain what sustainability means in our specific context. And the feedback that I got was that for many people in the business, it was actually the first time that they could really grasp the concept. And what that meant was that from the corporate strategy perspective, we had an audience who'd heard the words and they'd seen some of the internal marketing efforts around sustainability, but they didn't know. They didn't know how to align with the strategy and didn't know what specific steps they could take. But now, it's beginning to become tangible and meaningful to them. And what I also found was that the alignment with corporate strategy made it much easier to gain leadership support for a sustainable procurement program, because as leaders, we're all measured on how we deliver against sustainability strategy. So that presentation at the town hall turned out to be a kind of bridge that brought people together, different audiences, and showed how we could all align with that corporate sustainability goal. Then finally, the one that's jumped out to me was talking about small steps. And for me, this one makes an awful lot of sense. Because for example, if I were a team leader in operations, hearing about corporate commitment to sustainability, but not really knowing what it means, what would I do? I'd carry on business as usual till someone gave me some tools or a framework to use. And for us, in our context, this is precisely where sustainable procurement comes in, because we rely very extensively on external partners' capabilities. So my team can work with those operational leaders and others at quite a technical level for example, hosting workshops with potential suppliers or service providers to look at what we're planning to do with our research projects and collaboratively design more sustainable alternatives. And that kind of small step approach, as well as being, I think, an example of supplier engagement, it also educates key stakeholders in an experiential way because they learn by doing how to rethink their choices from a sustainability perspective. And because we go through the life cycle of an R&D project relatively frequently, we quickly have the opportunity to apply lessons learned to new projects. And in that way, we can make incremental improvements and build momentum across the business. And not surprising then that we found that we make a more lasting impact if we take this collaborative stepwise approach rather than just maintain that sustainability by fiat top-down mindset. So those are my thoughts and examples very quickly, inspired by what Sarah presented. Now, Sarah, I'm interested to hear your feedback. First of all, did I misrepresent or misinterpret anything you said, or any thoughts about the specific examples I gave?
No, Anthony, I think you're a model of someone starting out with that, with those right engagements and understanding. I'm particularly resonating with your notion that a lot of people who have heard about sustainable procurement really don't know what that means, particularly if they're outside of procurement, but even within procurement, kind of really getting people on the same page so that they understand, one, how important procurement is in overall sustainability performance, and second, what does that even mean? What do we do to actually execute on this idea? So it sounds as if you've done great work.
Anthony, I was going to pop in and share a reflection. Something you said resonated with me, which is this reliance on your supplier partners for help and expertise, right? And that resonates with me loudly in BP. I mean, I work for a large organization, and we're dealing with some large suppliers that have extensive capabilities in this space, and in some instances are much further on the journey than we are in terms of what does it mean to have sound procurement practices around sustainability. And in fact, we've done some joint business planning with some of our larger providers around, setting specific targets around carbon and water and waste. And it just really highlights the importance of having good partnerships externally to be able to make an impact. And there's a lot of exercises required. Now, you can't do this with every single supplier. Obviously, as we all know, working in procurement, you have to be very selective about which partners and those that can make the biggest impact. But it's a different set of questions we're asking now in 2022 around sustainability and dealing with suppliers than how we would have approached partnerships in the past.
Yeah, I think that collaboration is so critical. And very interesting, actually, Ryan, to think about that, where your suppliers actually have a sustainability offer that maybe hasn't been part of the conversation because you all just didn't know about it. So opening that door and saying, well, we want to prefer or do more business with suppliers who actually can meet our needs on this front as well as others, kind of draws people out of the woodwork in a way that is very helpful, I think.
Yeah.
I think this has really shed a light for us on what people have complained about for some time. A lot of stakeholders within the company have often felt we depend maybe too much on external partners and service providers. And yet, when we look at it from a sustainability perspective, some of these companies are so much bigger than us, and they actually have much more developed programs. And so actually we can leverage what they've already achieved and put in place in a way that would be very difficult for us to do by ourselves. So I think there's also kind of a spin we can put on it to show that actually it's an element of our strength by having a well-developed ecosystem which we can now leverage from a sustainability perspective.
It's an interesting question in the chat, if I may, and I think it's a very fundamental one, which is how do you link sustainability to cost savings, right? And Punita asked if you know any specific cases or studies or white papers, but I would say even examples from your own work. Have you seen this being done to link a more sustainable supplier to actual cost savings?
Anthony, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can start with an example from us. Yes, so I talked a little bit about using technology. to replace travel. Now I know it's kind of a basic one, but this is actually quite a significant area of spend for us in much of the work that we do. And so in a sense, the technology already exists, we're already paying for it. It's already part of how we run our projects. And therefore, to be able then to use it in a way that reduces some of the physical displacements that people have to make to conduct our work is a true cost saving right there. I mean, we're simply reducing like the number of air tickets, fewer car rentals, no overnights, all that kind of stuff. So I think in that example, there are some real tangible cost benefits that come from using a virtual approach, which obviously has sustainability benefits, but it also has clear, tangible financial benefits as well.
Yeah, I think another really, perhaps basic example is print management. And many people have done this for cost savings first, but it's also yielding significant environmental benefit. Print management, I remember Citi did a initiative a while ago, and I think in their first year they saved $700,000 in paper costs. And it was, centralizing print services, the standard, but that's one where you can get a huge cost savings and waste reduction. The most interesting thing about that is always when you centralize printing and people have to bring a fob to get their documents, I think it's something like 40% of documents are never picked up, which shows that people printing them at their desk was really not necessary. They just, were sort of churning them out, thinking, I've got a draft, I better send it, and then having another idea. So I think, one of the things we talk about quite often and actually have a whole sheet on is solution strategies. Again, it's not the one-to-one substitution necessarily. It can be taking away a whole process like business travel for a number of things that are no longer really required, displacing a person somewhere, reducing paper usage, finding ways to look at metrics as well. So looking at waste reduction is also cost reduction and climate greenhouse gas reduction. So it's partly the lens that you put on it and the calculations that you're able to make. One thing that people might want to think about is there are a number of eco labels, if folks are using eco labels, that have calculators that can give you both cost savings and carbon savings for your spend. And that's something innovative suppliers may often offer now, is that kind of calculation. So even if the cost saving is not apparent right up front, you may find that with a little dialogue and looking at what's out there, you can find significant cost savings. I put a note to Panita, my apologies, that we have a very large case study library, which is part of our membership benefits. And one of our award categories is focused on cost savings. So we have many dozens of good cost savings. And actually in all of our case studies, we have a cost savings section. So people talk about what cost savings they yielded. So I'd be happy to share a few of those and invite you to be a member, I guess, to come on in and search. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think, Anthony, we're at a point in the program where we're just wanting to check with the audience on questions or comments. If anyone would like to ask a question or share an experience to come off mute, you are certainly welcome to do that at this point in time. Just let us know. We were going to see if we could carve out space for a breakout session, but we're going to be quickly running out of time to be able to do that, I think, here. I see Caldwell has put a comment into the chat. In prior companies, we drove lean as well as consumption spec DEM and management into our internal and supplier operations, which reduce waste. So yeah, absolutely. Engaging the suppliers in a differential way in embedding lean practices to collaboratively drive improvements in sustainable outcomes. I think that's an awesome example. Yeah. So Caldwell, I don't know if you want to share more about that on the spot, but if not, that's fine too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can. We the last couple of years I've been in distribution, but I spent 23 years in manufacturing and doing supplier development across oil, aerospace, and a couple other high-tech industries. And I think when we were at our best, we didn't know it was ESG at the time. but not just doing it internally, looking at our demand, the way we specify things, the way we designed our products, and all those kinds of things, but driving lean into our supply bases really drove down our cost, improved quality. And we used to have an iceberg model. I love the iceberg. We had an iceberg model that tied quality to all the other things. So if you've got bad quality, then you're having to order more. Well, that's wasteful. That means more dollars, more manufacturing time, scrap, all these various things. And if you can drive that to a minimum, shorten your supply chains and everything else, to do it right the first time, as we used to drive internally and externally, it had a really positive impact across a whole host of metrics that now you might be tying another KPI to, like carbon, fuel consumption, whatever it might be. Travel is a great one. If you don't have to visit your supplier to fix the quality issues, you don't have a engineering team, flying 17 hours to Asia every other week. So I think tying all these, after 20 plus years, I think now tying all these bullets together under the umbrella of ESG, just, I don't know, it's very fulfilling at this point in my career.
That's an excellent example, Caldwell. I actually want to turn a question to you, because we had a poll at the beginning of the session that said 50% of the folks on the line here said that they have a gap in procurement skills. How did you train and develop people to be able to ask the right questions to drive these outcomes? Was there a development program for your people? And
yeah, not so
ahead.
much in my current company, but my prior companies, we developed skills assessments for our procurement and our tactical purchasing teams, so that when our buyers, who we really incentivize not to sit in a conference room or just get new dates, like what's your new promise date for the delivery, we put them in the field and we train them in a rapid lean assessment. And we used to call it shining the light on waste. So we wanted them out of the conference rooms, out in the field, doing the Gemba walks and really seeing, there's inventory piling up in front of these steps. Well, why? Well, because the machine tolerances are off, and so they have to go back and fix it. Well, that's more electricity, that's more cutting tool inserts, that's more and more. Plus it is pushing your lead times and your quality and those kinds of things out. So we built it into our training and our assessments. We also had subject matter experts, of course, that could be deployed, but we really believed in the power of the whole team instead of being stuck with the capacity of like 5 guys in supplier development. Well, if you've got 250 people in your global organization between corporate category management teams and your field operational purchasing teams, but you train them all to see, plus, the guys in your cribs, like on the indirect side, they're walking through the plant every single day. We train them on demand and specification management, stop looking down and start looking up and start asking questions. And as a service provider today, we're trying to teach our people to do the same thing. Like you hear a hissing as you walk by the machine tool, well, then there's air leaking out of go notify someone. That's waste. That's a value add that you can change for your customer.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that example. Very relevant. Anyone else, a question or an experience or comment to share about embedding sustainable procurement practices, or just know how to get started? I'll share one thing for us. One of the things that we're really trying to embed in our BP function, and this comes more on the indirect side because that's the space in which I work, but just simple baselining of carbon emissions for our categories. And travel is a great example. We've got a pretty progressive, I think it's progressive strategy around using technology service providers to help us create full transparency and of course have preferred travel solutions, but just getting people to measure their carbon footprint when they make purchasing decisions around travel is actually a step forward for us. And you actually can develop a persona around that. And as a team, we can aspire to reduce our carbon impact as we make decisions throughout the year on how we travel. So that's an area of opportunity for us that we're pursuing currently. Okay. Last call for any questions or comments, because I think we're going to be getting towards the wrap up here, Khaled. And I will say,
Yep.
we kept it a little flexible here to see what time we would have. For me, I'll share my own personal experience. For those of you that have not participated in the Sustainable Procurement Pledge sessions, one of the best things for me is making connections. And obviously it's a bit challenging to do that with 60 plus folks on the line. We were going to try to do the breakouts, but we were just not going to have space for it today. but in the future, we would like to have that collaborative interaction, so we all can make connections with one another, ask some pretty detailed questions about what we're doing in all our organizations to make a difference, and finding ways to help one another. So that would be a feature for future conversations as we get into more regular chapter meetings. So just wanted to share those thoughts. But Khaled, I'll hand over to you for maybe a wrap up, and I know you had some closing comments on some of the slides.
Yep. Share button again. There we go. Yeah, so we are actually up to the end of the day here, at least as far as it pertains to the World Sustainable Procurement Day. We only have, well, 2 sessions, but only one more time slot to go. So you can pick and choose if you want to learn about transforming fashion and sustainability in the apparel industry, or procurement in the pharmaceuticals industry as well. They're all happening after this session. And if you're interested, make sure you access wspd.earth/agenda, and you'll be able to register to the one that you'd like to participate. Before we wrap up, I'll actually ask the speakers any closing notes, any key takeaways that you like to share, anything at all?
Well, I'll say the main thing in successful sustainable procurement is that all of us align for impact. So, connecting, copying and pasting, peer learning, project-based learning together is the most important thing we can do. If we all do something slightly separate, poor supplier community is unable to respond. So this is a great start. And thanks very much for having me.
Yeah. I'll just say, just to echo those thoughts, the importance of connections, particularly many of us, including myself, we're pretty early in the journey around what this means in practice. And the more that we can share best practice examples, or even if they're not best practice, they're practice examples that we can all learn from. I think that's one of the real important things about what the SPP can bring to all of us. One of the other things that I've reflected on as I've had conversations like this is the importance of engaging stakeholders on sustainable outcomes at the front end of category management planning is really important. I think all too often we shoehorn sustainable outcomes into the back end of a live kind of strategy where that's not the first question we ask. And I think we're seeing a change around that. We're starting to ask the questions up front. It's not only about cost, right? The value metrics, the way that we look at impact is changing, right? And we all have a role to play in that, right? It's not about cost only and then figure out what else you can deliver in other metrics. And so we all have to encourage each other and share examples about how we're having those conversations and leading our stakeholders and our suppliers to put sustainability at the front end of how we make decisions. So I'm very much looking forward to connecting with all of you that have great ideas or need help in that area. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks. I guess I'd just add that I found particularly the impromptu discussion about lean being very, very thought-provoking, actually, because you can imagine if you've got stakeholders who may be a little bit suspicious of the sustainability agenda, you could probably bring in some very different concepts to achieve similar or the same goals. So that really, for me, has been very, very enlightening today.
Hey, can I throw one in that I took away from Anthony is you can't do this by fiat. Years ago, I was a major tier 1 to some very large global multinational companies when I was in oil and gas, without naming names. And they wanted to, on diversity tier 2 or tier 1, they wanted to put it into the contracts by fiat. And in a risk-averse industry, I said, I'm the big tier 1 here to you guys. Can we collaborate and share that risk and help develop suppliers? And I think that's one of the biggest things between the conferences of the last few weeks I've been hearing. It's much more now about how do we collaborate together than just flowing down and being the big guy in the room and demanding, that you can just sort of delegate this and have everyone below you just do it. It has to be collaboration.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think collaboration is really the name of the game, which is why I was really happy to see that SPLC would be joining the SPP for this session. So it is truly the name of the game. Anything else, Ryan?
Just lastly, if you're interested in participating in some form or fashion with the US chapter of the SPP, drop a note in the chat or reach out to us on the, you can send me a LinkedIn note or invitation. And we're going to be planning the next session very soon in the next month or so. So look forward to your continued participation and support.
All right. Yep. And I did post a link to the chapter session of the PP website somewhere in the chat. I'll just post it again right now. But yeah, so if you want to find us, it should be pretty easy. Just posting right now. So thanks everyone. Thank you for joining. This was a really, really good session. We do end it because I think some other sessions are going to use this.
All right.
Coming in.
Yeah, exactly. But I really appreciate everyone's time, and especially to the speakers and to Sarah, guest of honor. Thanks for joining. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks so much to all of you and to the audience. Great conversation, great start. And thanks, Khalid, for your moderation.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. All right.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah,
Take
Have a
care.
good one. Bye.
Bye.
bye. Bye.